down is what I do to my hanging baskets in the fall. Escape is what a few of my beans do when I'm picking the crop. A pin is what I use to clip my squash vines to the fence. A grass clipping mat is what I use to mulch the garden. And a near fall is what happens when I trip over one of my tomato cages in the garden. If you are wondering what all of these wrestling terms have in common with gardening, be sure to join me for today's show.
Funding for Prairie Yard and Garden is provided by Heartland Motor Company, providing service to Minnesota and the Dakotas for over 30 years. In the heart of truck country, Heartland Motor Company, we have your best interest at heart. Farmers Mutual Telephone Company and Federated Telephone Cooperative, proud to be powering Asira, pioneers in bringing state-of-the-art technology to our rural communities. Mark and Margaret Yakel-Julien in honor of Shalom Hill Farm, a nonprofit rural education retreat center in a beautiful prairie setting near Windham, Minnesota. And by friends of Prairie Yard and Garden, a community of supporters like you who engage in the long-term growth of the series. To become a friend of Prairie Yard and Garden, visit pioneer.org/PYG.
I just love it when people call or email me Prairie Yard and Garden show ideas. Last January, I was actually traveling to Fargo when an email arrived from a friend with a great idea. There was a wrestling coach who developed a love of gardening and had a beautiful yard. Well, that sounded like a lovely place for us to visit, so I contacted John Elton from St. Cloud, and he said, sure, come and see. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Mary. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now tell me, how long have you lived at this location?
We've been here almost 30 years. We moved here in January of '91.
And what was your yard like when you moved here?
Well, this was all farmland, so we were like Little House on the Prairie. I think this block ended at the street there, and there was maybe 4 or 5 houses, and not a tree or shrub on the place. Yeah.
So where did you start?
Trying to frame out the yard a little bit. So I planted the trees to get the hardscape kind of in place. And then as things developed, I incorporated those and then gardens around it to tie in where the trees were or the shrubs were so you didn't have to mow around them, you know, and then you just float along and made mowing easier.
Well, did you have a background in gardening or horticulture?
No, not really. I've been pretty much self-taught. I had an interest. My mother enjoyed gardening. My grandmother lived on a farm and she enjoyed gardening as well too. My father can't quite figure out where this gene popped out from wrestling coach to this, but it's something, you know, fortunately I had my summers off as a wrestling coach, and so gardening kind of became my stress release. And when you have the summers off, I could play out here, and it just kind of kept growing.
So how did you decide where to place the flower beds?
Again, that had a little bit to do with the framing out of the yard. Again, this was very flat, and I wanted to create my space, and so I put up the trellises. Originally, this one here was the first one to go up, and then I had a smaller one on that side too, and that gave me some vertical height that I could plant on, and then I added the gardens in front of it. I didn't want to create a wall, so I came up with this concept of having slots through the trellis to open up, just giving a feeling of openness without creating the feeling of a wall. And it's worked out very well. I've been very happy with it.
And then it looks like you have planted both clematis and honeysuckle to decorate.
Yes, again, to add color, I have a lot of clematis here. Generally, it's fuller, but I cut them back pretty hard this spring. Jack Monte, you can do that, and so that generally we'd have an early. This is the early flush. It's going to get another flush coming here later in the summer with off the new wood. But then the honeysuckle, which has been very nice, and then also the Virgin's Bower, which I use on those trellises over there, and they have that will become a white wall when that blooms.
How do you decide what colors that you want to use in the yard?
You're dealing with color, but you're also dealing with texture, height, and so you got to take all those factors into account when you kind of plan out the gardens. I've been one that's always, I like boldness. I like large areas of impact where rather than a scattering of different varieties of things, trying to make more of an impact. So like right now, this was a big bloom of peonies earlier in the spring with the iris off to the side. Now they're obviously done, but now the lilies have come through and they're just on the tail end now. So we're catching the last blossoms of the lilies, but now as they die back, we'll be having the daylilies come through, and along with the laetris and coreopsis and some other things that'll come through and continue to keep that color going right up till fall. And then in the fall we have, the black-eyed Susans and the coneflowers and those sort of things. I don't have too much for mums here. I like to go with things that are pretty sturdy and hardy, and mums just, you end up having to replant a lot of times. So,
John, do you use more annuals or more perennials in your beds?
I like to have a blend of both. It's easier if you have perennials because they're going to come back every year. There's a cost involved and also a time of planting when you do annuals, but I love how annuals transition between different plants when they're moving through the garden. So you have color all the time. That's a real plus. It was easier when I ran a greenhouse where I could throw a few extra seeds in and create this. So I spent a lot of time this spring. Recently retired, so I had more time to move things, split things, and I filled things in where typically I'd had annuals are now going to be perennials, and hopefully make my workload a little bit easier in the spring.
Where did you have a greenhouse?
I was the landscape manager at St. John's University. Previously, I was the head wrestling coach for 25 years, and then they created a position of landscape manager to handle the plantings of the inner campus, and I was in charge of growing the annuals and then planting and installing all the gardens that they have out at St. John's University now.
Oh, wow. Well, this is so beautiful, but would it be okay if we look at some of your other beds too?
Be wonderful, thank you, yeah. Mary, we're in the back corner of the garden area here. This is, these are the spruce trees that I planted myself when they were only about this tall, and now they've become the backdrop to the playhouse that is now my garden shed. And then what it has allowed to do is the Bleeding Heart has kind of filled this whole corner around the backside, and in the spring that'll be just a blaze of pink and white. Very, very beautiful. I try to get color all season long, so this is one of the first flashes I get in the spring. Then as we move around the corner here, we've got yarrow. Now this particular variety of yarrow I found to be, I was very skeptical about using yarrow because it reseeds and spreads very, very quickly. Mm-hmm. This seems to stay in place and stays vegetatively in a clump rather than reseeding out. But I do tend to clip back the yarrow once it's past its color bloom. So in a couple more weeks, I'll be cutting that back and allowing the vegetative growth to regrow, as I've done with the blue salvia. This was, at one point earlier in the spring here, this was a flush of blue in front of yellow that was just, right now the color is not in the yellow anymore, but that was vibrant yellow at one point in time. We've got some daylily that's in bloom right now, and as well as the calla lilies. They're just kind of finishing up right now. But as we go along, the phlox will start to pop here pretty quick, and then I've got some glads in the corner that will bloom. So I'll get fall color, late summer color in the back, and we've had the spring color. Now we're kind of in midsummer, and then it kind of keeps going. This is going to be obedient plant. Now this is a pink variety, so that's not quite in bloom yet. It's going to be coming here in another couple of weeks.
I love calla lilies. Where did you get those bulbs?
Those calla lilies were my grandmother's bulbs from the farm, and who went to my mother, and then eventually came here. And a calla lily is not hardy. It's not a perennial. You have to dig them out in the fall and store them. And I have a special place in the basement where it doesn't get too cold and it doesn't get too warm. And I'm able to hold those bulbs till spring.
Wow, that's great. Oh, and I see that you've got some lilacs here too.
Yes, dwarf Korean lilac. You can see the space that's vacant now because that hedge was about 6 feet tall and about 6 feet wide, and I couldn't trim it very well anymore. And so what I did is I did a rejuvenation, which means I cut it down to the ground, leaving them up stumps about this high, and all that has come back from this year's growth already. And you can see I've got some more dwarf Korean lilacs there. They've bloomed, and next year I'll probably cut those back and restart those as well too.
Well, and I see you have some dianthus here in the front. Do those overwinter for you?
Yes, they do. I've been very fortunate. I really like them. That's Sweet Williams, and that comes back every year for me. And I think they still sell it as an annual, but I have had very little trouble with it coming back year after year. And it's again, it's on the tail end. It needs to be, you can see the seed heads. If I trim that again, I'll get some more blossoms from it.
How do you keep up with all of the weeding?
You know, good planning. If you space your plants appropriately, they don't crowd each other, but they fill the space. Plant needs to have contact with the ground, the seeds do, the weeds do, and they have to have light. And so I use just grass clippings as a mat that I put down. I do preen in the spring very early. Again, it's like crabgrass prevention. You wait too long and you missed your spot. So I do preen it, and then before the weeds get a chance to get going, I get my grass clippings from my yard. So I don't use weed and feed in the spring. I do my weed and feed in the fall, and then I can use the grass clippings all summer long to make a nice thick mulch.
Well, here it looks like you've got a beautiful blend of shrubs, the hydrangea, and perennials, and then even annuals in the front.
A little bit of color to hold it over between the seasons. We've got the Stellador daylilies that are just finishing up, but we've had the hydrangea that has been blooming for some time. I got some Veronica in the corner that kind of holds that corner a little bit. And then again, we've had dwarf Korean lilacs that have bloomed earlier in the spring. And then I've got the honeysuckle that, you know, has color. And and then of course I've got the amber maple that I keep that under control, but that'll give me some fall color as well too.
So did you build this wall here at the same time you did the others?
No, different walls. This was the first wall that went in. That went in at the same time as about half of that wall. Then we came in and I put this wall in, and this is the most recent one. So that honeysuckle is only a year old now, and it's already grown to that height.
And blooming.
And blooming, yes. We've got the autumn joy sedum that'll be blooming in the fall too. So I along with the hydrangea. So I do get color that I try to keep going all summer long with different blooms. Mary, now we're on the side gardens here, getting closer to the house and the deck. This particular garden is a little bit more of a shade garden. We do have, you know, the shade in the west from the house that's next to us, plus some of the trees that have grown up here. So this has kind of evolved into more of a shady garden. So I'll talk about some of the plants that I've used to bring out that aspect of things. A stilbe. Stilbe is a beautiful plant. These were all cuttings that I made from one area at one point. I moved those in. These were new last year, so I've been kind of changing the garden with time. And there was annuals there last year, the year before, and then this year we put in the stilbe. But we got peonies, so we're going to get some spring color right away. The rhododendrons gives us some beautiful color right away in the spring with a magnolia. This is a merle magnolia, so that gets beautiful big white flowers at the same time. It's wrapped with geranium that blooms in this very early in the spring as well too. So this gives us a color of purple and white that wrap around here. So there's a time where right now it looks very green, but there was a time when this was just a blaze of color, which was very nice. Now as we kind of move along, we've got the phlox that will kind of be taking over the show here, and the monarda. They're starting to bloom, but they bloom at the same time as the daylilies and the ligularia, and has continued. It's very happy and has continued to fill in that whole back section there. So there'll be a big blossom of yellow spikes that will bloom, and they have a very long bloom time. So probably 3-4 weeks of nice yellow color. Ties in well with the daylilies, and then we'll migrate into the phlox. And then this is Simus fuga, and I've moved some to the back there, some here, some back over here. That has a long spike that comes up that's like a white rat tail that blooms real late in the season, so that will be kind of a centerpiece at one point later in the season.
Well, it's got such beautiful foliage
The
right
foliage,
now,
yes.
too.
Yeah, originally it was much darker. It's called snake root. It was all dark like this purple right here, but it's kind of reverted back through the years, repollinating, reseeding, and it's kind of reverted back to probably its natural form, which is the green form. But you can see we've worked quite a bit with different kinds of hostas. The hostas, you got to be a little bit careful of slugs, so I watch them. They're the first ones to tell me if I've got some slug issues. The variety you use makes a big difference too. Some slugs will go after one variety but not another. But this is Montana. This is one of my most favorite hostas. It comes up like a vase and then cascades down, and it's such an intense yellow when everything is still kind of green early in the spring. This really kind of holds the show. It's very, very nice.
And then I see you have some ferns in here too.
Yes, this is lady fern. I actually dug those out myself and did a planting. They're a native fern, so you can find them in the woods. And what I like about it is the ostrich fern tends to turn yellow late in the season, in the late summer, and it has a nice, seed head that comes up that some people really like. This doesn't have that, but it gives a nice, again, I was looking for a texture change between the large leaf hostas and the ligulera, and the ferny, frondy leaf of the fern kind of breaks up that large, bold leaves of the other plants. So that's the reasoning I have it in there.
So why did you create a bed right here?
It creates a walkway. As you come into the yard, this creates almost like it wants to pull you into the yard. And as you do, whether you're leaving it or you're coming into the yard, it opens up what you see in front of you. So there's kind of a narrow passage there, and then it flows into the yard, and it wants to draw you into the yard. That was part of the design as well too.
I have a question. I'm very interested in growing strawberries. What do I need to know to get a good crop?
Okay, well this is a new strawberry planting that we just started about 3 months ago in late May. And now as we get towards the end of summer and early fall, you can see that the initial mother plants that we put down have made lots of runners like this. And one of the things we want to do is get these runners kind of tucked down into the row. We want to form a nice narrow row about 1 foot to 1.5 feet wide. Now the reason we want to do that is so that, for one reason, is that the strawberries don't compete with one another too much. A lot of the gardeners let their strawberry beds get very wide, and what you tend to find is most of the fruit on a strawberry bed is produced right near the edges, because in the middle there's just too much competition. So what we try to do is keep the rows narrow so that there's a whole lot more edge space. The other thing that helps with is allowing the plants to dry off after we get a rain or a heavy dew, and that keeps the disease problems down, like the gray mold on the fruit and the leaf spotting diseases. Now, the other thing we need to remember with any new planting of strawberries is that weeds are probably one of your biggest foes. And so a lot of weeding tends to be needed in that first season. We're kind of at the end of the summer weeds like this purslane here, but even right now as we get into fall, we're going to be starting to get the winter annuals coming in. So you can't forget about your strawberries in your garden even well after they've fruited in June.
Ask the Arboretum Experts has been brought to you by the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum in Chaska, dedicated to enriching lives through the appreciation and knowledge of plants.
John, this is a beautiful area here. Tell me about it.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, it is my favorite spot in the yard. Everything else around here is to surround this. And the sound of running water, the koi fish, the flowers, it's my retreat. It's the place at the end of the day I can sit down and relax and just hear that sound of running water. And then to see the gardens around it, it's my favorite spot.
Well, when we were walking here, I noticed that there were some strings over the pond. What's that for?
That is my protection from blue heron. I have lost some fish. I've had blue heron come down and empty my pond. $1,000 worth of fish gone. The wire, it's 30-pound test line, and I just string it like a spider web over the top. It's really not abusive as far as looking at it. You don't really see it that much. But the blue herons can't walk through the pond, and they stalk fish walking through the pond. And as they do that, they trip on these wires, it startles them, and they fly off. And I haven't had any problems since I've done that. In fact, I moved the fish in here, and by that afternoon, I had a blue heron sitting on my roof looking at my fish. And then he flew down and he landed on the pond. And of course I run out of the house and I chase him away because I hadn't put my strings up yet. And he was already, I don't know how they can spot those fish from that far away, but they must be flying by, see him, and boom, he was here. He came back 3 times until I got my strings up. And of course I didn't get a chance to get into the pond, but that's how quickly they can find your fish and eat them.
Wow,
Yeah.
but that's a great idea to use string.
Yep.
You have so many beautiful flowers. Do you pick them and take them inside for
I do.
bouquets?
My wife really likes to have flowers, but she likes them in a vase. And so like peonies, I had 4 large vases of peonies because when they're in bloom, you might as well pick them, bring them in the house. But calla lilies, that's one of the reasons I have so many flowers is I like to be able to bring vases in and we give them to friends. We have them in the house. So right now I would have lilies in the house because that was kind of their time. And but I wanted to save them for the show, so I didn't pick too many.
How do you keep up with the watering here?
I use an irrigation system for the grass, and I still use a walking tractor, like one of those Nelson rain trains, and just basically a sprinkler, oscillating sprinkler, and I just kind of keep an eye on things because the sprinkler system does not hit all the gardens, so you have to know where dry areas are. I can look at a garden and I can say, well, it needs some water, and it's based off of how much rain we've had, that sort of thing.
Did you use any books or anything to figure out where or what to plant?
Yeah, I'm like I say, I'm self-taught, and I did a lot of research. When I plan a garden, I have a vision of what I want, but that vision is all based off of knowledge that I've gotten from books. You need to know when things bloom, how tall they're going to be, what conditions are they, what sort of light, what sort of acidic soil, those sort of things. All, planting the right plant in the right place that's the key to the story. And giving, how big is it going to get? if you plant something that gets this big around, that far apart, they're going to be competing and killing each other, you know. If you give them the right amount of space, they eventually, again, shade the ground and weed seeds can't grow. I don't have to spend a lot of time weeding. You know, it's not like it's a chore. I've got to go through that bed. It's going to take me 4 days, you know. It's so full that there's no space, and it's got that base of grass that separates the ground from the weed seed, so it can't sprout. And it works. It works for me anyways.
So did your family, your children end up growing up to enjoy gardening?
They enjoyed it, but they enjoyed it from the house. In fact, it was kind of funny. When I designed gardens for both of my children in their yards, 2 for my daughter. She just recently moved to a new place in North Dakota, and I redid all the landscaping there. Again, it was like a farm field, so it was a blank slate to work with. But I remember she goes, "Dad, would it be okay if I came home and just kind of helped in the gardens for a while to learn all this stuff that you know?" I said, "Honey, I've been waiting 25 years for you to ask me that question." But no, she has a very much appreciation for it now, and I installed the gardens, but they've done a wonderful job of maintaining them. And in fact, we just put a pondless water feature in their garden this spring, so it's a cascading waterfall that cascades into rocks and then disappears, because they've got kids, and you know, they wanted that, but they didn't want to worry about the kids drowning. And so a pondless water feature is the way to get the sound without the problems of algae. And
John, it's so great that you've been able to pass on some knowledge and love of gardening to your family. But thank you so much for letting us come and see your beautiful yard.
Thank you, Mary, for coming. I really enjoyed this.
Funding for Prairie Yard and Garden is provided by Heartland Motor Company, providing service to Minnesota and the Dakotas for over 30 years. In the heart of truck country, Heartland Motor Company, we have your best interest at heart. Farmers Mutual Telephone Company and Federated Telephone Cooperative, proud to be powering Asira, pioneers in bringing state-of-the-art technology to our rural communities. Mark and Margaret Yakel-Julien in honor of Shalom Hill Farm, a nonprofit rural education retreat center in a beautiful prairie setting near Windham, Minnesota. And by friends of Prairie Yard and Garden, a community of supporters like you who engage in the long-term growth of the series. To become a friend of Prairie Yard and Garden, visit pioneer.org/PYG.